Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in my office at the main library, and for about 4 hours, they were jackhammering right outside the window, but they stopped about an hour ago, so I'm recovering now.
Oh, that sounds not very fun.
it, it, it got old after a while.
That happens a lot down here too. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. I'm a little early.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm here at the Carnegie in my basement office. We're open to the public, but it's been a little slow.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm excited to see that the ballot box show is going to 21C. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited for the artist's work to be seen.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have to admit that I haven't even seen it.
I know. Well, since the world closed on the day of our opening.
And I haven't, yeah, I really haven't gone anywhere. Very many places. I'm kind of more on the strict side of things. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're not alone.
yep. So yeah, that's great news.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Ramona.
We all ready?
We're gathering. Welcome everyone who's joined us so far. We're just going to give it a few more minutes and let everybody get signed on. But welcome to everyone who we see so far. Welcome everyone. I see we have more people signing on. We're just giving a few minutes to let everybody get signed up and logged in. But welcome to everybody who's on so far. Good to see your faces.
While we wait, some of you might want to make sure that your name is what you want people to call you by while we're on this meeting. And if you need to know how to change that, if you go to the top, I think right-hand corner, you'll see 3 little dots. You click on those 3 little dots and you should see rename. Then click on rename and you can type in your name.
Yeah, I can see we have one phone number. If you're calling in on the phone, can you let us know who you are? It's a 432 number. Oh, they must have signed in. Okay. We'll give it about 1 more minute just to see if anybody else is still logging in, and then we'll get started. But welcome everyone who's on so far. Good to see you. Few more people signing on. Thanks for everybody being patient. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our virtual meeting today. This is the Build Back Better Together Arts and Culture Focus Team. Thank you all for giving us your time and signing up for our work team and joining us today for this virtual meeting. I'm Sarah Lindgren. I am an arts administrator at Louisville Metro Government. I'm kind of your liaison to the city, and but joining all of you as our focus team and committee members. So thank you for joining me. We're here together. We're brought together to have a conversation about arts and culture, and to eventually develop some action steps for the arts and culture sector. And we're thinking about several different challenges in our conversation today and in our conversation moving forward. We're thinking about COVID-19 response and resilience as we're still in the middle phase, not necessarily in a recovery phase yet, as we continue to try to address this challenge. We're also thinking about racial equity in the arts and culture sector and the urgent need to address racial equity, and other challenges, recession, other challenges that come along with COVID-19 and the racial justice movement that we're experiencing right now. So thank you for bringing your minds and your hearts to this conversation today. A couple of things I want to talk about just business-wise. Hopefully you've all received emails from me with the schedule moving forward. You should have received an email with meeting dates and topics, as well as a calendar invite. And if you haven't, please let me know and I'll make sure you get it. We'll continue to meet virtually and engage in between meetings with surveys and other ways to stay in touch and to hear your input. We'll be on Zoom today, so I think most of us have experienced Zoom before, but just as quick reminders, please keep yourself muted while you're listening to others that are speaking, so that our sound is as good as possible with so many people on at once. Please use the chat function if you have a question. As we get into our meeting, we'll have some kind of panel style discussion, and then we'll invite you to participate in the conversation by using the chat function. That's at the bottom of your screen, right in the middle, like a little speech bubble, and it says chat. You just type in there your question and we'll keep an eye out for it. We will also use a breakout room, so be ready for your breakout room assignment. We'll put everyone into smaller groups to have a little bit more discussion. And then we will do a poll where we will ask you to participate and respond to some specific questions. And we'll break all that down as it comes along, but just wanted to let you know what was coming. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the lovely Ramona Lindsay, who's going to be our facilitator for the conversation today.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And Erin Rosenblum is also helping us behind the scenes today. So I want to thank both of them for helping to manage this meeting. Well, I am a practicing artist. I'm also a former elementary school educator, and I currently work in philanthropy. So today I'm going to try to bring a little bit of all those different skills to this conversation. And I really believe in people being able to talk with one another. So as Sarah mentioned, we're going to do some breakout rooms where there'll be 3 to 4 of you in a room for about 10 minutes talking about the same things that we're going to be speaking with our panelists about today. So to just set up a little bit, today we really want to kind of focus our conversation and our discussion on systems level actions or changes that we may be able to initiate through this Build Back Better Together strategy. And when I say systems level, I'm talking about changes that we can make that are long-lasting, long-term, that really address how we operate within the arts and culture ecosystem in Louisville. And today's conversation also wants to focus on the needs of artists. And when I say artists, that's artists across all disciplines, so performing, visual, any type of artist. So the needs of the artists in Louisville and the needs of people who consume art. So that could be art patrons, people who come to our shows, people who collect art, but anyone who consumes art. In some later discussions, we're going to be talking about our arts institutions and organizations. But today we want to try to really focus on artists and art consumers and looking at systems level changes. I know that we're right now in a phase of emergency response where what can we do right now to help an artist or a consumer of art right now? But I would like us to think a little bit more about some long-term operational things that we might be able to enact now that can address not only racial equity, but also economic equity, racial and justice and economic equity as we're going through this rebuild strategy or Build Better Together strategy. So I want to introduce our 3 panelists. And the reason for these panelists today are not to really act as experts, but to share their experiences from their point of view to give us something to talk about when we go into our breakout rooms. So hopefully they will plant some seeds for further discussion, but we're not looking to them for answers, just for their perspective. And today with the panelists, we're going to be discussing 2 central questions. And the first question is going to be around what are systems level barriers in our arts ecosystem? And the second are what are some actions that we can take that might help us overcome some of those barriers? So I want to introduce our panelists. The first one is Lee Birchfield from the Louisville Free Public Library. And I want to share with you a little bit about why we chose Lee, or invited Lee to be on in this discussion. The Louisville Free Public Library is one of those institutions in our art ecosystem that generally helps remove barriers to resources and technology for art consumers and artists. So we thought it could be interesting to hear from Lee some of his perspectives on some of what those barriers are and some of the actions they're taking to alleviate those barriers. The second panelist is Brianna Harlan. Brianna is also an artist, and she's an MFA candidate at Queens College. And Brianna is also the creator of what started, I think, as a piece of activist art, but has turned into more of some data collection. And it's called the Louisville Art Scene: Injustices and Inequality. It's a survey of the arts ecosystem in Louisville, arts and cultural ecosystem in Louisville. And she's also does a lot of socially designed art actions. And then our last panelist is James Lindsay. He is also an artist. Brianna's a visual artist. James is a performing and visual artist and graphic designer, but he's also a board member of the Elevator Artists Resource Group. And James's leadership at Elevator is helping Elevator Resource Group identify supports for local artists representing all performing and visual disciplines, so those artists can thrive in Louisville's arts ecosystem. So I welcome all three of our panelists. And I think if you put your Zoom on speaker view, you can do that in the top right-hand corner. You can either have speaker view or grid view, and whoever's talking will take up the full, display right there. Okay, so this is our first question. And the panelists, we didn't decide in order, but I would like to give you like 5 minutes each to answer this first question. And this same question will be the question we discuss in our breakout rooms. So the first question is, what are some of the systems level barriers in arts and culture preventing all Louisville residents from fully engaging in the arts and culture ecosystem, either as an artist, performer, or consumer? What are some of the system level barriers that are preventing all Louisville residents from fully engaging in the arts and culture ecosystem, either as an artist, performer, or consumer? Who wants to start? Okay, I'm gonna go in alphabetical order. Brianna, B.
Okay, so it's kind of hard because my answers for both questions are kind of tied into each other because I don't feel like I can address one without the other one. But so I think a lot of people answer this question and they say stuff like funding, or like discrimination, not enough people at the table, not enough representation, not enough inclusivity, and all of that is true. But to me, those are symptoms of what is wrong, and that's not getting to the root of the issue. So I think locally we have an issue with digging critically into like the mess of it. Like I think Louisville is very much a city of conversations, which is good. You should have conversations, you should have communication. But the work that goes in after the conversation, and I like to compare it to any relationship, right? Once you air out what's wrong in any relationship, you have to continue ongoing active, see, I'm going into solutions now. But you have to go into long-term active conversation that doesn't end. That communication has to be constant. It has to be based on relationship. It can't feel, what I feel like a lot happens here is transactional issues, or like we'll come together, we'll talk about the problem, and then we'll try to come up with a solution that we just kind of drop down on it. And then some measurements are maybe done not with the same type of energy, not with the same amount of investment, not with the same amount of participation. And so like, if you think about that way of working for any other type of relationship or issue, it wouldn't work. So why we think that it's going to work for this, not even thinking about how in the past it hasn't worked, right? Because it hasn't. But then also taking that model and applying it to anything else, you can see objectively it's dysfunctional. So that's an issue for me. And that's not even going into like systemic racism, sexism, classism, right? Like, because those things we've done research on. That research is there. People have done that work. So for me, talking about how that is showing up locally and how we are failing to really address it and dig into it and confront it to make long lasting, as you said, solutions that are based on ongoing relationships and dialogue and a commitment to the messiness that it's going to have to take is the issue for me.
Okay. Would you mind real quick, Brianna, sharing one of those an example of where one of those isms has shown up in the work that you've done through your survey? An
Yeah.
explicit example that is a barrier?
There are so many. There are so many examples. So the survey she's talking about is the survey that I'm doing to research how racism and sexism shows up in the Louisville arts and culture scene through community participation and community direction, actually. So an example of how that is shown, I'm trying to pick an example that won't end up using someone's experience as like.
You want to think about it and we come back to you?
Please, thank you.
All right. So James, while she's thinking, since you're next, I think you're next in the alphabet. It's got J, K, L. Yeah, J. How would you answer that question? What are some of the barriers?
I think there's some barriers. I think that there's so many factors. I think Brianna said she said some really great touch points on what's going on in the scene. I think that when it comes down to it, I think that there's a lot of barriers as far as, I think everybody always says like representation, but I don't think everybody talks about like what goes behind that. So for instance, like there's a lot of kids who draw, they grow up drawing, but they don't have any idea that you can have a career as like a graphics designer, or they don't know that there are like paid, there's paid salary jobs for your art. So that's very telling. That's actually something that I've actually recently learned with working with AIGA recently, and just learning how much of a lack of representation of people of color, lack of representation of specifically like Black women that were in the design community. So there's definitely a lot of room to grow there. I think there's also a lot of poor business practices for a lot of artists that do get, let's just say, that do get the looks. I think that's a big issue as well. I think it's definitely one thing to talk about the lack of people who haven't really got necessarily looks, but also I think there's a lot of bad business practices for artists. There's so many artists that I meet that get treated very poorly when they're out, that are underpaid for in comparison to their white counterparts, that they don't get the same hospitality when they go and do events or whatever the case may be. And they could be musicians, it could be painters, dancers, whoever. There's very few paid employees on a lot of our big arts programs, such as different things like Louisville Ballet. There's very few representation of Black dancers that are actually paid. Louisville Orchestra, you can kind of go down the list and kind of tell that there's an issue there. So, I mean, there's a lot of layers. I think it'll take longer than 5 minutes to talk about it, but there's definitely a lot of issues there.
Thank you, James. And when we go into our breakout sessions, we'll have a little bit more time to talk, and all of our panelists will be in one of those sessions as well. So Lee, you're next. What do you see as some of the barriers?
Sure, thanks. So, I mean, I could just sort of start listing barriers, right? But let me take just a second to to sort of set the context. So the public library, our library, has been around since 1902. So that's 118 years. And libraries from the earliest time that public libraries were founded in the United States, the entire idea behind them was to make information available to everyone. And think about what it was like, that books were sort of a rare commodity. They had finally started being printed by the printing press, so they didn't have to be handwritten, but they were expensive and they were hard to get. And even if you had some, you didn't really have anywhere to put them. And so this idea, this sort of grassroots idea came about of sharing this resource so that everyone could have access to all of this knowledge and learning. So libraries, public libraries, have always been one of the most progressive, equalizing ideas in the history of the world, right? Well, sort of, if you were white. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Louisville's library system is often praised for is our Western Branch Library, which was the first library in the United States. I'm going to try to get this right. First library in the United States for African Americans, staffed by African Americans. What a fantastic thing. Except really, I think kind of the reason for doing that was because the African Americans couldn't come to the main library. So they had to have a separate library. So there's this long history of libraries being this progressive entity. And librarians are proud of that. We want to bridge gaps. We want to raise people up. We want to provide people with the resources they need to raise themselves up. And so it can't possibly be that libraries are part of the problem. We're part of the solution. But when you come to the main library, there's a statue in front of the North Building. It's Benjamin Franklin, old white guy. There's a statue on the side of the building, Abraham Lincoln, great man, but another old white guy. We had a statue out in front of our South Building that was William Prentice, who not only was an old white guy, but he wasn't just prejudiced against people of color, he was prejudiced against other white people. He was so bad. And that statue sat there for 50, 60 years. We have a system for cataloging our books. That system was written by white people to categorize our collections based on this worldview that was not a diverse worldview. So I would say that the biggest obstacle that we've got in public libraries in getting past the barriers to more equitable and inclusive culture is learning to recognize that we are part of the problem and that this entire system has to be looked at and rethought and reworked. So we try to do that. And we have libraries all over the community. And what we see is varying patterns of use at libraries depending on where you are. So if you're at the St. Matthew's Library, there are parents coming in with children, 100 at the time for a Thursday morning story time. Not now, COVID, but pre-COVID, 100 people at the time for a 10 o'clock story time on a Tuesday. If you go to the Shawnee Library, what you've got are 100 kids coming in when school gets out to use the computer. Well, where are the mothers in that neighborhood with their kids coming into the library? Understanding that it's not about building a library and having a story time. And I think it was Brianna that said this earlier, that there is this whole multi-layer history that feeds into all of the inequities that we see in our community, that it really does make it hard to talk about the obstacles, because the obstacles are so old and entrenched, and people aren't even aware of how they keep reinforcing these over time. So when I think about the library, so I getting ready for this, I tried to think of who are the stakeholders for the arts and culture community. I identified 9 groups of stakeholders. We're talking about 2, patrons and artists. And I'm gonna cheat a little bit and throw in with artists staff at the library, because we have story time performers that do a performance multiple times a week for kids. But we don't really think of them as artists, even though they are. So we're talking about patrons and staff today. And we're trying to think about how do we get people who aren't stakeholders as either patrons or artists to become stakeholders as patrons and artists. And I think of the obstacles that keep us from getting families into libraries, depending on what community they're in. It's about funding. It's about funding for the library so that we can have more staff and more locations and be more convenient and have more hours. But it's also about funding for them. There are transportation obstacles. There's a lack of awareness of the kinds of services that are available at the library, and the sort of systems that are in place make it harder to get that information into the hands of the people who need it most. Time and convenience. You know, it'd be great if everybody was a stay-at-home mom who could bring their 3 kids to the library for a story time on a Tuesday morning. That's not really how the world works. And so we can have a diverse schedule of story times, but until a parent has the time to take out of their day to bring their child to the library for that program, it doesn't matter what time we have it. Another one is approachability. You know, I can have a program at the main library, and if it's about any book that was written before 1920, it's going to be about a book that was written by a white guy. Yeah. And so how do we find things to use for programming that are reflective of the community and that are relatable to the people that we're trying to bring in as stakeholders? And then the last one is something that I don't hear people talk about a lot as we talk about equity, but it's something we're very aware of at the library, and that is language. So almost everything we do at the library is in English, but a lot of the people that we are trying to turn into stakeholders are people for whom English is a second language, and they don't know very much of it. And that really creates its own level of barrier to that. So I hope I didn't go over my 5 minutes. That's some of my early thoughts on it.
You did, Lee, but I'm gonna have to figure out a way how to cut you all off when y'all do go over 5 minutes.
You have a mute button.
Oh, thank you. You've given me permission. I didn't want to do that in the middle of you talking. Thank you. So we're getting ready to break into our breakout rooms, but Brianna, you were going to give us one example.
Yeah, I'm just going to use my own because I don't like using other people's examples when they're, especially if they're not present. So I've worked at several arts institutions in Louisville, and I think a lot of the reason why I'm hired is because I do community-based work and because I'm also an artist, and also because I check boxes. And I'm always, yeah, Black woman, queer, like it just looks good. I look good on the diversity paperwork. I look good. So I'm always like given a lot of attention at the table, or like respect, I guess. Really, I think it's placating respect, but never like a position of power to just work with authority on what I know best. And I see this even with the people around me, that the people that have the most power, the gatekeepers of the arts and culture scene here, will not trust will not trust the people with the talent, the expertise, the skills, to do their jobs, right? And so when we're talking about our scene and why it's not equitable, we also have to talk about why it's not thriving. Because when you don't let the people that have the training, the skills, the experience, and all of these different talents that they're bringing to the table do what they do best, because you are so attached to your power and your position, then you're going to hit a ceiling, right? The gate is strangling us, right? It's strangling the potential of our city to be and to flex all of the really great things that we have going on. So yeah, so for me personally, I've actually quit every job I've had at an arts and culture institution after realizing that they weren't gonna listen to me, and getting tired of arguing with people who weren't gonna listen, basically.
All right. Thank you, Brianna, for that personal example. And so all three of our speakers have given us some food for thought about what we see or what they see as barriers to artists, art patrons, staff. Lee added that in, staff and consumers. So we're going to break out into breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, you'll probably be with 3 or 4 other people. I want you to continue that discussion. We're going to be in this breakout room for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask that whoever is in room number 3 and number 1, they're going to give us a real quick report out of some of the highlights from your conversation. So if you're in room 1 or 3, I'm going to ask you to just share a little bit about what you heard. And are there any questions about the breakout rooms? If they are, if you could type it into the chat real quick, and then I can see and answer it while Sarah is setting us up to go into our rooms.
And Ramona, do you also want to ask if people have input they want to record in the chat while they're in the breakout room? And
No.
if they could bring those comments back to the full meeting chat, that would be very helpful.
When we come back from the breakout rooms, when the breakout rooms close, I'm going to invite everybody at the same time to type in the chat something that you want us to want to remember. And so we'll all see that. And everything that we put in the group chat, we can also save, and that can inform, that'll be like our notes for our conversations. So hold on in your head, something that you might want to add to the chat when we all come back. We're not going to talk about everything in the chat. That's why I'm only asking for room 1 and 3. We don't have that much time during the day to let everybody talk. Are there any other questions? All right, Sarah, if you're ready.
Here we go. So if you're still in the group meeting, you should be receiving an invitation to join a separate breakout group. And if you click on that invitation to join, it'll take you to a separate conversation with a smaller group. Suzanne, can you hear me? If you're still in the main room, you should be receiving on your screen an invitation to join a breakout room. You just click on that and it'll take you to a smaller conversation. Suzanne, can you hear me? If you're still on the line and you're in the main meeting room, you may have received on your screen an invitation to join a breakout room. And if you click on that invitation, it'll take you to a smaller group conversation. And if you're joining us on a phone line and you're not able to reach to access on a screen and go to the breakout room, just hang with us on the line. The breakout groups will come back into the main group conversation in about 6 minutes. So just bear with us if you want to hang on the line.
Sarah, how many breakout rooms did we have?
We had, I believe we had 8 rooms. So there should have been about 4 people in each room.
All right, that sounds good. I did not do this on purpose. You know, this was a random, breakout room strategy, but I said rooms 1 and 3 were going to report out. Room 3 was my room, but I'm not going to report out. Someone else is going to report out. So I don't want y'all to think that I set that up so I could talk some more. It wasn't me.
Whatever, Ramona.
Report out. While we hear our report out from group 1 and group 3, I want to invite you all to put in the chat something that you took away from your conversation, something that stood out from your conversation. This is our collaborative note-taking. So everyone, right now, type in something that was important that you took away. And while I'm typing mine, who was in group 1?
Well, also by happenstance, I was in group 1, but as also like you, part of the process here, if either of my colleagues in group 1, Lynn or Bentley, wanted to represent us, I would be perfectly happy with that. So we'll see if they do, and if they don't, I can.
Aaron, I think it's you.
Okay. So hi everybody, and probably anyone talking in the big room here, if you want to do a quick intro of yourself, so we all know who everybody is. My name is Aaron Rosenblum. I'm a program coordinator at the Louisville Free Public Library, and I'm currently supporting this Build Back Better Together initiative. In my room, there were 3 of us, and we talked about, I took notes even. We talked about a continuum of, or a path from exposure being so important as a barrier to just getting especially kids to know about the arts and know about arts as a career, and just to be just the exposure that leads to a life where you have a consideration of arts and culture from that childhood exposure through education. That's all the way through professional degrees in the arts. The path between that exposure and the education, and the path from there to careers. So ways that we might bolster that path to a career, and recognizing that there are careers, there are lots of kind of nonprofit or teaching careers in the arts, but there are, for-profit careers in things like graphic design, and that we don't necessarily have that path or that continuum laid out or reinforced for young people and throughout people's lives. Aside from that, we also talked about pushing back against our own biases. So people at different points in their careers as arts administrators or administrators of arts programs, working with kids or working with anyone, and picking up on what Brianna had said in the first session, that those people who aren't giving that power and aren't giving that trust, hopefully they can get there by continuous, over years, addressing their own biases and continuing to think about why they're not handing anything over, why they're not handing over power or authority to young leaders, new young leaders. Yeah, I think that now, if either of my colleagues want to correct any of that, maybe they'll speak up if I got it all wrong.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad that group 1 felt good about that. And we are going to have Shamika Parrish-Wright report out for group 3.
All right. Just want to first say Ramona set me up, but I am happy that we had a really good conversation. First, I want to thank the panelists. I really agree with everything you said, and just seeing it on the ground on how the disparities in transportation, access, and then really understanding what art is and having that conveyed to our youth and to definitely into our Black and Brown communities that, like someone had mentioned, often grow up doing art and don't really, it doesn't have it really formally recognized. And we talked about high-end art versus who's kind of gatekeeping the art community and really not being open. But when you think about art, and if you think about art that has been given high value or that has been exposed, a lot of exposure, it's usually abstract art. And we know that, there's a lot of folks who don't realize that their writings are forms of art, that the things that they do, and that it comes in so many forms. And I think as a city, we can do a better job in engagement and exposure. And then we also talked about, along with that are gatekeeping around arts and culture, I don't think it's in a negative way. I don't think they're necessarily trying to do it, but that there needs to be more attempts to being more inclusive, to making sure everyone has an opportunity and is at the table. Because and like many of you, when we travel around, we see so many examples of art in other cities that we know we have here. And whether it's theater or whether it's murals or whatever it is, there needs to be access to do that. And that access comes through our libraries, which are pillars to the community, through our arts centers, which are pillars. And I love the example from talking about the public libraries and how some mothers are able to bring their kids to story time, but other mothers are they have barely enough bus fare to send their kids to the institutions. They're sending them to the libraries and to the art places because that's already understood that that's a place where no matter what happens, there's an opportunity to learn and grow from what they see. So how do we make that process more available? And I will encourage the folks in our group to add anything else in case I missed it. But it was about engagement, giving more access, and also doing a re-education around what is actually art and doing a better job at sharing that out.
Thank you, Shamika. You did a wonderful job, and I think you hit those things. And because of time, we're going to move on to our next question with our panelists again. So everybody sees how that flows now. The first round, I did not mute anyone. The second round, I am going to mute people if we go over time. All right, because I want to make sure that we get some good stuff in. So the next question for our panelists, and this time we're going to go first alphabetical order. It would be Lee and Brianna. And the question is, what are some actions? Because this is what this Build Better, this thing that we're talking about, we're working with, is about actions. What actions can we take in this city? So the question is, what are some actions that can be taken to begin to eliminate or dismantle systems level barriers so artists, performers, and consumers can fully engage in this arts and culture ecosystem? So what are the actions that we can take so we can all fully engage in this art ecosystem? And Lee, you start, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is probably most crucial is just the approachability of art, right? If we're talking about arts and culture, and if culture is what people do, I think in general, as a community, so not everybody or not any particular leader or performer or head of an organization, but on the whole, we tend to use the word art and culture. And I think what we generally have in mind is Northern European art and culture. What are the most well-funded arts organizations in the community? The Louisville Orchestra, the ballet, Actors Theater. These are historic institutions that are preserving an art form that is not really necessarily at its core culturally diverse. And so I think the first thing is we've got to ask hard questions about whether we really mean it when we say that what we want to do is broaden and bring more people into arts and culture. And for me, being at the library, and I'm always going to keep going back to our day-to-day experience here. One of the things that we are continually doing at the library is looking at the books that we buy and the movies that we buy and the CDs that we buy, and trying to make sure that we are buying things that are reflective of the entire community. And so, I guess one of the questions to ask is, if what we're trying to do is get people who aren't patrons of the library or patrons of the theater or patrons of a museum into those museums, then the first thing we probably need to do is find out, when you go to the museum or the library or the theater, what is it you want to do while you're there? And how do we produce content that's relevant to you?
Thank you. James.
I was just kind of freestyling a couple things that I was looking at here while we was talking about like solutions. And I was looking in the chat and just thinking about different things. But one thing that I said was empowering artists, but not being in their way. I think that's one big thing. I think a lot of times with just a lot of funding and a lot of projects and a lot of times when people reach out, it can come off very self-serving, and it doesn't really seem like you're really trying to help artists, especially, and I'm not sure if any other artists on this chat, in this chat that's Black, that have had a lot of people who aren't Black reach out to you recently. Sometimes it could feel very convenient and kind of like, oh, let's try to reach out to more Black people now that this is all going on. Like, I think true diversity is something that you would have to do every day. This isn't something that you cut off and cut on, because it's something that we can't cut off and cut on. It's an actual lifestyle. So it's deeper than, and it's bigger than just how many Black people we can put in this art gallery, or who we can have represented. It's actually a full lifestyle. It's like, you know, what about where these people live? What about where you live? What about who you're around? What about the places that you patronize? It's an ecosystem. Artists have to feel comfortable, feel welcomed. I think that's one big thing too. We were talking in our chat too, because we talk a lot about people not being, a lot of times about Black artists not being represented, but there are a ton of artists that get booked for a ton of gigs in town that feel terrible when they leave out of every venue. There's a ton of artists who feel completely underpaid. There's a ton, I've seen it firsthand, especially working with Elevator, and I work with some of you all on this call with a lot of the grant work that we were doing, but just reading some of the grant applications for a lot of these Black artists, it was a shame, just what they were having to go through on a day-to-day, just to try to survive. So I think that's one thing too. The art industry as a whole is a very capitalistic industry. We also have to remember that, like, it's definitely financial. It's definitely based on capitalism. You have small artists, you have bigger artists who put out smaller pieces and do different runs all around the world and get paid bigger checks, etc. It's a capitalistic system. So we really have to understand the system that we're in. Lance in our chat made a very good talking point about utilizing Glassworks for like a residency for artists, since it's going up for sale, using the top 2 floors for a residency for artists who, that way they don't have to necessarily focus on surviving. They can just literally just focus on creating art. And I thought that was really cool. And like I said, diversity can't just be a hire. And also this conversation on diversity should never feel like pulling teeth. It's a way of life. Like if you want to be around people that don't look like you will do that every day if you really care about it. If this is something that you care about, it's what you wake up, you breathe, it's the air that you breathe, it's the stuff that you do, because racism works exactly like that. It's the air that we breathe, it's the places that we go. It's as soon as we wake up and as soon as we go to sleep, it's the exact same thing. So we really have to look at it like that. Also, one other thing too, just think about it. You can feel like you're helping people, but also step on their toes. There's been a lot of that too. There's been a lot of organizations and businesses who feel like they've reached out and have really helped out artists, but behind closed doors, a lot of those artists are like, man, they didn't really make me feel that comfortable. One instance that I can think of is there was this amazing Black woman has this great program for kids where she's taking kids to all these different design studios to teach kids about design. Well, she took this big group of Black kids to a design studio, and the design studio, they thought that they were doing a good deed, bringing Black kids to a design studio. Well, afterwards, the kids had left, and you would think going to a really nice design studio, you would like the fact that you went. Well, the kids didn't really like the fact that they went because there were no Black people on staff. So they didn't really feel comfortable, so that it made them not necessarily like design that much more. So you got to really get behind the psyche of what you're trying to do here when you're talking about this stuff. That's all I got.
Thank you. And you had 9 seconds left, so you did great. Brianna.
Wow, the timing. Yeah, I think a lot of my points are really similar to his, honestly. We talked about in my group a little bit about how a lot of people are trying to use their power more ethically, but their power isn't sourced ethically. So that's impossible. And then also the idea of redistributing power ethically inside of a broken system still leaves the system broken. So then the third option is to redo the system, the structure, the whole structure of the system, right? And I was asked, well, how do you do that in the short term? That's a really big task, right? And I agree with that, but I think it has to do with, as we've talked about, releasing power, the power that comes from the inequity and the power that comes at the expense of others, because other people will be like, well, what do you need then for self-determination? We need the same things that you have. Like, it's not really a difficult question at the end of the day. The difficult part is how we get there. So I think this also creates a condition in communities that have to go without of competition. They're not able to fully support and fund each other in the same way, to patronize each other, like go to each other's events and shows and all that in the same way, for that supportive environment, because they're scrambling and competing for so many resources that we're locked out of. So that gap of getting power and getting success from other people's expense has to be eliminated and given back to the people that it's been historically taken from. And that comes with, as I said earlier, like a more relationship-based practice. And yeah, that's Black, brown, trans, immigrant communities, all of that. And realizing that also the systems outside of the arts and culture communities also affect arts and culture communities, and systems and practices reinforce each other. So if we're gonna talk about how we fix the system, we have to talk about the practices in the culture and vice versa. But yeah, I think there are lots of different ways to start work like that I can't go into in the time allowed. But yeah, there are people doing this work, and I think some people are going to have to come up off of some power. You're just going to have to come up off of it. You'll have to give it back. It wasn't yours in the first place to take, and time has been up. And I will say, to James's point about diversity having to be a natural way of life, everything else on planet Earth understands diversity is the way to grow forward and to evolve. Like, everything feeds off of each other in the cycle of life and balance, except human beings, because we're greedy and we think too much and we get selfish and we get scared and all of these things. So we have to get back to the point, not just to have a thriving arts and culture system, but to actually be on this planet together and not all die, which is happening. It's not going to work anymore, y'all. Like, this is no longer optional. We have to come up with standards to exist on this planet together, standards for arts and culture scene. And it's either get on board or you're a threat to the survival of everything that we're building at this point. And you got to choose what side you're going to be on.
Thank you. That was pretty.
Thanks, Ramona.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty deep, but it wasn't deep. It was challenging. That's what it was. It was challenging because I bet a few people were uncomfortable when you heard somebody's got to give up their power, because they're like, that might mean I might have to give up some comfort. But when we get ready to go into our next session, we are getting ready to continue this discussion around actions in your breakout room, and you will probably be with the same people unless someone jumped off. And I did not invite you to introduce yourselves to your group when we were in that last meeting. So if y'all didn't introduce yourselves, do that this time. And groups 8 and groups 8 and 5. 8 and 5. 5 and 8. That's who you are. You are going to report out. So make sure that you know if you're in room 5 or 8. And we're going to talk about what are some actions that can be taken to eliminate or dismantle system levels barriers.
Ramona, can I ask you to switch a different room than 5? Our 5 got reshuffled.
Yep. What about 6?
Oh, that'll work.
Okay, 8 and 6. 8 and 6. All right. And when we come back, we'll do a little brief breakdown, and we got some more stuff to do. So I look forward to seeing you all on the other side of the conversation.
Okay, here we go to breakout.
And group room 6 and 8 are going to report out. So since we went backwards with the panel, we'll go backwards with the numbers. So group 8 will go first. Sarah,
Okay, well,
oh, Julie, that's your group.
yeah, I didn't actually take notes.
You don't have to take notes. Just tell us what you remember from the conversation.
Well, we were talking about, I was sort of chiming in about a small level issue of what can we do to take specific actions. And maybe this is too specific, but at this point, but the idea of creating spaces for artists, and even as specifically as to, I think someone, Lance, I don't know Lance, but someone said he was recommending something about creating spaces in Glassworks. Well, there is a way to do this perhaps without completely starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel, because there are small organizations around Louisville, like West Louisville Women's Collaborative, or even Calliope, who are endeavoring to create artist residencies or artist studios or places where artists can actually afford to be and make and feel like they have a space. So those are some specific actions. But another thing we talked about was, you know, the idea of having these conversations are great, but there can't always be the goal of more conversations. So what's one of the next thing that comes after having the conversations? And one of the things that I think it was really came about from what Brianna said, which is creating and committing to standards in our organizations. How can we agree upon standards that create equitable spaces and organizations, and then commit to those and make sure that those standards include steps? For example, steps to give up the power, whatever that may look like. So that's sort of the action steps that we discussed. And if I forgot anything, Gretchen or Jeff or Brianna, please chime in.
That's great. And one of y'all make sure that you type in what you just said about creating steps and a commitment to standards, because that is an action. And we don't want that to get lost. So put it in the chat.
I'll add something. The last thing we talked about, I think, I don't really remember. I just talk and then sometimes I like completely blank about what happened. But one of the last things we said is about conversations. And if it's important to have like conversations that are diverse, or maybe if you're talking about a specific place, like maybe somewhere in West Louisville, is it okay? Like when you're having conversations with just Black artists. And I said both. I'm not sure if everyone agreed with me, so I'm not going to say that they did. But I'm saying both because there are different levels of community. There are communities within communities. So making sure that you're supporting the safe spaces, like we're talking about giving Black and Brown communities money and support and funding and resources, like supporting the communities within the communities, but then also supporting the levels that come after that of when communities are interacting with each other and working together, all the way up to the point where you have the system. And then that's where, since it was informed from the root up to the top, that's when the change may become. So we need all of those conversations. And then, yeah, as Julie said, like making sure that there are steps and intention for steps outside of those conversations with an action plan, and making sure people know that coming in so that they're speaking not just this is how I feel, but this is what I want.
Thank you, Brianna. And I see we have 6 minutes left, and I want to go through a poll, but I don't want to break the heart of group 6. So I want to ask your permission if we just go with your group, typing your comments in the chat instead of presenting out to everyone. And I don't know who's in group 6, but if someone
I don't know. James Lindsay's got some things he needs to say, and Lance Newman. Give them 4 minutes. We need 4 minutes at least.
Go for it. Go for it. If y'all go.
I'll let Lance go. Lance, you go ahead and start it off.
Okay, real quick, I'm saying simplify grant language. Elevator's grant application is an example of this, where they ask the artists about their background, their passion or what purpose they serve, and how COVID has affected them. It was simple, straightforward. It didn't ask for a product, right? Grants shouldn't be asking artists for products. If they just give the capital, then artists will have the space to do that. That was one of my things. And the other thing, deliberately changing the structure. So if a selection panel is 10 people, 7 white, 3 black, let's flip that on its head and be deliberate about making our selection panels, our management staff, heavily people of color and black people, and practice that differently. That's me.
Yeah, yep. No, and I kind of agree. That's what we were kind of just talking about, just kind of shaking the cage, and really just diversifying hires on big roles. I was kind of mentioning one of the people, somebody who I knew that worked for who's the curator for the MCA. She's a Black woman, Naomi Beckwith. She's super dope, and they're doing some really next level stuff. But you need people in these type of roles to really like push the needle, instead of it being so like cyclical with how we want to release our art and how we want to consume it. We should definitely break the mold a lot of times. I don't think we're getting dangerous enough. That's all I got.
Kristen?
Oh, what they said.
What they said, okay, all right. I heard you speaking up for the crew. I wanted to make sure that, you were the one professing that y'all had your time. I want to make sure you got yours too. Thank you. Group 6 for chiming in. Make sure that you put in that simplified language and flipping the composition of review panels in your chat. The reason I'm asking you to put this in the chat, because when we close this session, all this chat is going to be saved. And we can use this information to inform our actions and our recommendations for the city for the Build Back Better Together Arts and Cultural Strategy. So we were not just talking to talk. We were talking to come up with some actions that we could recommend for our arts and culture group. So our next step is going to be this group and others who couldn't make it to this call. There will be a follow-up survey. On that survey will be the 2 questions that we just discussed. Plus there are going to be 3 action items that could be action items that may be implemented now. These are suggestions. We want to see how you think these suggestions, if they will be helpful, not helpful, just forget this thing. We don't need to even put our mind on that. But I'm going to tell you what those 3 actions that we're going to put on the survey are. One of them was recommended by James Lindsay in a conversation he and I had. He talked about creating a pipeline of leadership for arts and cultural institutions by having a mentor-mentee relationship between our artists and leaders of arts institutions. Because if you're not sure what's happening in those institutions, how can you possibly lead or even change those institutions? So mentor-mentee relationship was one of those things. The other, I was trying to go from the top of my head, but I can't remember. The other was looking at how we address public art and doing that in a three-step strategy. And when we say public art, we just don't mean visual art, because public art can really embrace all of the art disciplines. But I don't think many of us in Louisville realize that. So part of this three-step process is, one, to have an outside source look at the applications that we're using for calls for public art proposals, to see what barriers are in our current applications and how we can remove those barriers so we open up the process to more people. Two, the second step is looking at educating arts and cultural administrators and decision makers on what is public art. And when we say what is public art, we're talking about on an international level. How does the world look at public art, not just Louisville, and also educating artists on that. And then the third would be, the third step in that recommendation would be a wide, an open RFP public art just for local artists. So that was the second recommendation, which is that three-prong. And Sarah, can you help me with the third one? Because I can't remember right now and I can't find my notes because I'm rushing and I'm flustered.
Sure. It was about providing a peer-to-peer learning opportunities.
And that one was recommended by Lance and Rihanna in another conversation, where they said that artists should be paid to help educate other artists about strategies and skills to help their art practice thrive. So instead of bringing in outside experts, we have local experts who can help other artists. So let's pay those artists to do that work to help the whole arts ecosystem thrive. So that was the third one. So those things will be on a survey that is coming out. And I invite all of you to take that survey so we can have that documentation, as well as that documentation will be supported by what's in this chat. And we will share that information before our next work group meeting. And with the hopes by December being able to recommend actionable steps to our city to help move our whole arts and culture ecosystem forward, to address systems level changes around race and economic equity. I think that's all I had. I'm 2 minutes over. Sarah, is there any closing thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to you, Ramona. Thank you to our conversation leaders, Lee and Brianna and James. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone for participating and giving us your time and your thoughts and your open minds and your open hearts today. We very much appreciate every one of you and everything that you contributed today. Please tune in to our next meeting, which will be on September 24th, also at 4 o'clock, and we will be announcing our conversation leaders for that meeting via email very soon. And just in between meetings, you can always tune into our webpage for recordings of this meeting, previous meeting notes, other documents related to our process. It will all be posted there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to see your faces. Thank you.
I just want to know who's going to be last.
Somebody tried to
Sorry
come
about
for y'all
that. I
in
was
the
going to
chat.
the next thing.
Somebody tried to come for y'all in the chat, and I tried to check them on your behalf.
Oh, great. I was wondering where that came from.
Yeah. People want everything to get done in one conversation. It's not. Come
It's
to the
not
next one,
possible.
and the next one, and the next one. Do the work.
That's right. Keep showing
All
up
right.
and doing the work. I appreciate you, Brianna.
I appreciate all of y'all. Have a good one. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna let y'all battle it out for who's left in the.
All right,
Thank
I'm
you,
out. I'm
Brianna.
out.
Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you,
Thank you, Shamika.
Brianna. Thank you, Shamika.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go too.
We'll be last. Thank you.
Bye.